Welcome to Life Stories, where we share inspiring tales of resilience, empowerment, and transformation. Today, we bring you the incredible journey of Emily Clark, a woman underestimated by everyone around her, even her own husband. What starts as a story of betrayal and mockery turns into a masterclass in strength, strategy, and reclaiming power. Emily's rise from the shadows to the forefront of a corporate empire will leave you speechless and inspired. Stay tuned as we unfold this gripping story of redemption and growth, and don't forget to subscribe to Life Stories to begin today's tale. Let's dive in. Mark leaned back in his chair, swirling his glass of whiskey as his laughter filled the room. His friends joined in, their voices echoing against the marble floors of my living room. 5 men, all senior executives at Everest Technologies, dressed in tailored suits and radiating confidence. Mark, my husband of 8 years, their VP of operations, led the charge of mockery with a smug grin plastered across his face. "I mean, Emily couldn't even land an entry-level position," he said, clinking his glass with one of his colleagues. The irony stung. If only he knew the truth. I sat quietly on the far end of the room, my practiced mask of quiet humility firmly in place. Over the years, I'd grown used to wearing it, pretending to be the struggling wife with no direction or ambition. This facade was both my shield and my strategy, protecting me while I worked in the shadows. The cruel jokes continued, each one slicing a little deeper than the last. "Maybe she should apply at the coffee shop down the street," Mark added, his voice dripping with mock sympathy. "They're hiring baristas. After all." The laughter roared again, and I offered a weak smile, keeping my composure. Inside, my heart ached, not from their words, but from the man Mark had become. This was not the supportive, kind man I'd fallen for years ago. That Mark had believed in me, or so I thought. But success, or perhaps its illusion, had transformed him, revealing a side of him I hadn't seen before. What none of them knew was that I was far from unemployed or aimless. I owned Everest Technologies, the very company they worked for. I had built it from the ground up 12 years ago, long before I even met Mark. It was my first love, born from a desire to reclaim the pride and dignity I'd lost when I watched my father's small business crumble at the hands of corporate raiders. Every corner of the company bore my fingerprints, from its values to its vision. But I had intentionally stayed in the background, creating layers of anonymity to protect myself. Experience had taught me that success often attracted the wrong kind of attention. 3 failed relationships with men who saw me as their golden ticket had left me wary. So when I met Mark, I decided to experiment to see if he could love me for who I was, not what I had achieved. I presented myself as a struggling freelance consultant, someone trying to find her place in the world. At first, Mark seemed different. He was kind, patient, and encouraging. "You'll find your path," he would say, squeezing my hand. "Just keep trying." But the moment we married, and he moved into what he thought was our house, the cracks began to show. Mark loved the life of luxury, the imported furniture, the art on the walls, the crystal glasses he and his friends now drank from, all paid for by the company he thought had rejected me. As the years went by, his patience turned to condescension, and his support became ridicule. Success, or the illusion of it, had inflated his ego to unbearable heights. And now, as he led the charge of laughter at my expense, I realized just how far he had fallen. I glanced around the room, observing the 5 men who joined him in his mockery. Each of them was someone I had hired through discreet firms, carefully selecting them based on their expertise and alignment with the company's goals. Or so I had thought. Over the past year, my private investigators had uncovered the truth: secret meetings with competitors, inflated expense reports, and unethical decisions that benefited their personal interests. They had not just betrayed my trust, they had violated the very principles upon which I built Everest Technologies. "Maybe she should try interviewing at Everest again," one of them joked. And Mark laughed the loudest. They had no idea that the interview they mocked had been my quarterly inspection of middle management. They had no idea that the woman they belittled was the same one who signed their paychecks. As the evening wore on, their voices blurred into the background. My mind was focused on tomorrow. The day everything would change. The documents were ready. The evidence compiled. The board of directors, who only knew me as the reclusive founder, Emily Clark, was briefed. Tomorrow. They would meet me for the first time, not as a shadow behind encrypted emails, but as their CEO. I looked at Mark, his laughter still ringing through the room, and felt a pang of sadness. I had loved him once. Deeply. I had believed in the life we were building together. But the man before me was a stranger. Someone who thrived on tearing others down to build himself up. As the night drew to a close and the men stumbled out to their waiting cars, I retreated to my private study. The hidden wall panel slid open, revealing the secure workspace where I managed the global operations of Everest Technologies. The monitors hummed to life, displaying real-time data from across the company. I traced the edge of the termination papers on my desk, each one a symbol of accountability, not just for Mark, but for every member of his circle. Tomorrow, the masks would come off, and the truth would come to light. Sitting in the glow of the monitors, I thought of my father's words: success isn't about who shouts the loudest, it's about who waits, watches, and acts at the right moment. The perfect moment had arrived. Tomorrow, they would finally see who I truly was. The evening after Mark and his friends left was a quiet one. But not in the comforting sense. The house was still, save for the hum of my secure workstation and the occasional sigh I let escape. It was the kind of calm that came before a storm, the moment when you know something monumental is about to unfold but are still grounded in the gravity of the present. I had spent years preparing for this moment. Yet the weight of what was to come pressed heavily on my chest. I thought about Mark as I sat at my desk. He hadn't always been this way. The early days of our relationship were full of promise. He would listen intently when I shared my dreams, offer kind words when I faltered, and once even stayed up all night helping me prepare for what he thought was a big freelance presentation. He seemed genuine. Or at least I believed he was. But somewhere along the way, that man disappeared. Was it the illusion of power? The sense of belonging among those who seemed larger than life in their tailored suits and high-paying titles? Or had this side of him always been there, waiting for the right circumstances to emerge? The question tugged at me because I didn't just feel anger toward Mark, I felt sorrow. I mourned the version of him I had fallen in love with. The man who no longer seemed to exist. I turned my attention to the files spread across my desk. A stark reminder of why I couldn't let emotions cloud my judgment. These weren't just ordinary termination notices, they were ironclad documents backed by months of evidence. Mark and his friends hadn't just made mistakes, they had knowingly exploited their positions for personal gain. The inflated expense reports. The cozy relationships with competitors. The inappropriate use of company funds, it was all there. Carefully documented. Still, it wasn't just their betrayal that stung. It was the casual cruelty with which they had treated others. The dismissive way they spoke about subordinates. The way they mocked potential hires during interviews. The complete disregard for the people whose hard work kept Everest Technologies running. Mark and his friends saw themselves as untouchable. But tomorrow, that illusion would shatter. A message pinged on my secure phone, pulling me out of my thoughts. It was Sarah, my most trusted executive and one of the few people who knew my true identity. Final documentation is complete. The board is briefed. Everything is ready for tomorrow. I allowed myself a small smile, grateful for Sarah's steady hand through all of this. She had been with me since the early days of Everest, back when it was little more than an idea fueled by desperation and hope. I had told her everything when I decided to step back from the spotlight, and she had been my anchor ever since. Thank you, Sarah. I typed back. Tomorrow will be the beginning of something better. The night wore on. and I stayed at my desk, going over the plan one more time. The board would meet at 9 a.m., followed by a staff-wide announcement at noon. Mark and his friends would have no idea what was happening until it was too late. Every piece had been carefully placed, every contingency considered. I glanced at the termination papers again, this time lingering on Mark's. His name stared back at me, a bitter reminder of how far he had fallen. I thought about the life we had built, or rather, the life I had built while he took credit for my hard work. The house, the art, the furniture, the very glass he had raised in mockery earlier that evening, none of it existed without me. For a moment, doubt crept in. Was I being too harsh? Was there still a part of Mark worth salvaging? But then I remembered the mocking laughter, the way he had encouraged his friends to join in belittling me. I thought of all the people he had hurt, all the careers he had derailed with his arrogance. This wasn't about revenge, it was about justice. As I prepared to shut down for the night, I glanced at the photograph on my desk. It was a picture of my father, taken before his small business was swallowed up by a faceless corporation. He had always told me to stand tall, to fight for what was right, even when the odds seemed stacked against me. Tomorrow, I whispered, running a finger along the edge of the frame. This is for you, too. I turned off the monitors, letting the room plunge into darkness. Outside, the city lights twinkled like stars, and I thought about all the people who would wake up tomorrow, completely unaware that their lives were about to change. For Mark and his friends, it would be the end of the road. But for Everest Technologies, and for me, it would be a new beginning. I climbed into bed that night, the weight of anticipation still heavy on my chest. Mark was already asleep, blissfully ignorant of what the next day would bring. As I lay there, staring at the ceiling, I reminded myself of the lessons my father had taught me: patience, resilience, and the importance of choosing the right moment to act. Tomorrow was that moment, and I was ready. Morning came swiftly, though I had barely slept. My alarm buzzed at 5 a.m., and I rose with a steady resolve. Today was the day I had been waiting for, the day I would take back my company, my name, and my dignity. Mark was still in bed, his face buried in the pillows, likely nursing a mild hangover from the previous night's indulgences. I watched him for a brief moment, feeling a pang of regret for what could have been. Once upon a time, I had dreamed of a life where we built something meaningful together. Now, I saw only the remnants of a partnership that had never truly existed. I dressed deliberately, choosing an unassuming navy suit and simple flats. This morning wasn't about making a statement just yet, it was about blending in. By 6:30 a.m., I had slipped out of the house and arrived at Everest Technologies through the service entrance. Sarah met me in the basement security office, her eyes sharp with determination. "Everything's in place," she said, handing me a visitor's badge labeled Angela Miller. It was part of the charade, a fake identity for a fake job interview. I nodded, glancing at the badge. Let's make it count. The elevator ride to the HR floor felt surreal. For years, I had observed my company through reports, cameras, and intermediaries, keeping my distance to protect what I had built. But today, I would step directly into the world I had created, not as the founder and CEO but as an anonymous job candidate. I arrived early, sitting in the lobby with a copy of Everest Technologies' annual report open on my lap. It was strange, seeing the document I had reviewed countless times from the perspective of someone hoping to join the company. Around me, employees buzzed with energy, greeting one another with polite nods as they passed. At 8:45 a.m., Mark strolled through the lobby, radiating his usual arrogance. He didn't even glance in my direction. If he had, perhaps he would have recognized me, or perhaps not. My carefully chosen attire, nervous demeanor, and downcast eyes were a stark contrast to the confident woman he had married. Miss Miller, the HR representative, Thomas, approached right on time. Yes. That's me, I replied, offering a nervous smile. Follow me, please. The interview process was almost laughable. The skills assessment was designed for entry-level positions, basic coding problems, and behavioral questions that I could solve in my sleep. I deliberately fumbled, pretending to struggle while watching Thomas's expression shift from polite interest to quiet dismissal. The real show began during the panel interview. 3 middle managers sat across from me, their faces marked by thinly veiled boredom. They didn't bother to introduce themselves, nor did they make much effort to hide their condescension. So, Miss Miller, one of them began, barely looking up from his phone. It seems like you've been between positions for a while. Why do you think you're qualified for a role at Everest? I took a breath, playing my role perfectly. It's been challenging, I said softly, adding a hint of nervousness to my voice. But I'm passionate about technology, and I believe I could contribute a lot if given the chance. They exchanged glances, smirking as if I had confirmed their suspicions. Through the glass walls of the conference room, I saw Mark walk by. He did a double take, his eyes narrowing in recognition. Moments later, the interviewers' phones buzzed in unison. I didn't need to see their screens to know that Mark had sent a message, likely mocking my presence. The rest of the interview was a masterclass in cruelty, subtle jabs, exaggerated sighs, and dismissive gestures. They didn't see me as a person, only as a joke to be passed around. When the interview ended, Thomas escorted me to the elevator, his tone flat as he said, "We'll be in touch." As I stepped inside, I heard Mark's voice from around the corner. "No way, that was your wife," he said, his voice full of disbelief and amusement. "She really is desperate. Did you see her suit? Probably from Target." The laughter followed me as the elevator doors closed, but I didn't feel the sting. Instead, I felt a quiet sense of satisfaction. They were so confident, so sure of their superiority, and so utterly unaware of what was about to happen. At 9:30 a.m., I stepped into the restroom on the executive floor, where Sarah had left a garment bag for me earlier that morning. Inside was my armor, a meticulously tailored charcoal gray suit, sleek heels, and my CEO badge. The transformation was instantaneous. Angela Miller, the nervous job candidate, vanished. In her place stood Emily Clark, founder and CEO of Everest Technologies. As I adjusted my pearl necklace in the mirror, I thought of my mother, who had given it to me years ago. Success, she had always said, isn't about shouting, it's about showing. At 10 a.m., I stepped into the boardroom. The members of the board were already seated, their faces a mixture of curiosity and respect. They had known me only as a shadowy figure, someone who preferred encrypted calls and written updates. Today, for the first time, they would meet me in person. Across the hall, Mark and his inner circle were in their usual morning meeting, laughing and joking as though the world belonged to them. That, too, would change. "Good morning," I said, my voice steady and calm as I took my seat at the head of the table. "Thank you all for being here. Let's begin." The boardroom fell silent as I stood at the head of the table, my presence commanding attention. For years, I had been the invisible architect behind Everest Technologies' success. But today, the room was mine. The board members watched me with wide eyes, no doubt surprised to see the reclusive founder finally step into the light. "Before we begin," I said, my voice steady, "there's something you all need to see," with a nod to Sarah, who stood near the monitor. The screen lit up, displaying the company's incorporation papers. My name, Emily Clark, was there in bold print, alongside my signature. It was a name most of them had seen only on legal documents or encrypted emails. But now, it carried weight. "As you all know, I've been closely monitoring the operations of this company. What you don't know," I continued, locking eyes with each board member, "is that over the past year, I've uncovered widespread misconduct among senior executives. including the VP of Operations. I paused, letting the room absorb my words. Mark's name wasn't mentioned directly, but the implications were clear. This evidence, I said, gesturing to the monitor, which now displayed a series of damning documents, includes inflated expense reports, unauthorized meetings with competitors, and unethical behavior that undermines our values as a company. It also involves a culture of harassment, discrimination, and blatant disregard for the well-being of our employees. The board members shifted in their seats, their expressions turning grim as the severity of the situation became clear. Sarah began presenting the evidence, one piece at a time: email chains, surveillance footage, and recorded conversations played out on the screen, each more incriminating than the last. At 11 a.m., Mark and his inner circle were summoned to the boardroom. They walked in with casual confidence, still unaware of what awaited them. Mark's eyes scanned the room, landing on me. For a moment, his expression faltered, confusion and disbelief flashing across his face. "What's going on here?" he asked, his voice tinged with irritation. I turned to him, meeting his gaze with an unwavering calm. "Good of you to join us. Mark, please, have a seat." He hesitated but eventually complied, as did his colleagues. The room felt heavier with their presence, the weight of what was about to happen pressing down on everyone. "Over the past year," I began, addressing them directly, "I've been conducting a thorough investigation into the actions of several senior executives. The results have been illuminating." Their faces shifted from mild annoyance to alarm as Sarah resumed the presentation. Every detail of their misconduct was laid bare: the secret meetings, the misuse of company funds, the toxic work culture they had fostered. Mark's composure began to crack. "This is absurd," he said, leaning forward in his chair. "You can't seriously believe." "I can. And I do," I interrupted, my voice cutting through his protest. "The evidence is irrefutable, Mark. And it's not just misconduct. It's betrayal. You didn't just betray me, you betrayed this company, its employees, and its values." The room was silent, save for the sound of the monitor switching slides. Each piece of evidence was a nail in the coffin, and they knew it. "Effective immediately," I announced. "You are all terminated for cause." The words hung in the air like a final judgment. Mark's face went pale, his mouth opening and closing as if searching for a rebuttal. His colleagues looked equally stunned, their confidence evaporating under the weight of their exposed wrongdoings. "You can't do this," Mark finally said, his voice rising in desperation. "I'm your husband." I felt a pang of something, regret, perhaps, or the remnants of love long extinguished, but I didn't let it show. Instead, I reached into my pocket, pulled off my wedding ring, and placed it on the table in front of him. "As of this morning," I said, my tone resolute, "you're just another terminated employee. Security will escort you from the building." The doors opened, and 2 security officers stepped inside, their presence making it clear that this wasn't a request. Mark looked at me, his eyes pleading, but I remained unmoved. As he and his friends were led out of the boardroom, I turned to the board members. "This is a turning point for Everest Technologies. From today onward, we rebuild not just our leadership but our values. There will be accountability, transparency, and a commitment to the people who make this company what it is." The board nodded, their expressions a mixture of relief and respect. The room felt lighter now, as though a dark cloud had been lifted. I stepped out of the boardroom and returned to my office, where Sarah was waiting with updates. "They've already started reaching out to their contacts," she said, handing me her tablet. "Trying to do damage control." "Let them," I replied. "It won't matter. The truth is on our side." That afternoon, as Mark and his colleagues scrambled to salvage their reputations, I focused on what mattered most: the future of Everest Technologies. The storm had come and gone, leaving behind a company ready to rise anew. The days following the termination of Mark and his inner circle were nothing short of transformative. For years, Everest Technologies had been a company cloaked in subtle fear, its employees walking on eggshells under a leadership that thrived on intimidation and condescension. But now, with the source of that toxicity removed, the shift in atmosphere was almost immediate. I arrived at the office early that week, as I always did, and walked the halls. For the first time in years, I saw genuine smiles, not the forced politeness of people trying to stay unnoticed. Teams that had once worked in silos now collaborated openly. It was as if the entire building had taken a collective deep breath and exhaled years of tension. One of my first priorities was to meet with employees who had been affected most by Mark and his cohorts. I scheduled a series of one-on-one meetings, sitting across from people who had once been dismissed, belittled, or overlooked. Many of them seemed unsure at first, their guarded expressions a testament to years of distrust. But as the conversations unfolded, I saw glimpses of hope return to their faces. One meeting, in particular, stood out. Jennifer Martinez, a brilliant software engineer, had left the company 2 years ago after clashing with Mark. She had proposed an innovative approach to AI integration, only to have her ideas dismissed in a meeting where Mark had publicly humiliated her. I remembered that day vividly because her proposal had come to me through back channels, and I had implemented it quietly under a different name. That project had saved the company millions, but Jennifer had never received the credit she deserved. When I called her to offer her job back, she hesitated. "Why now?" she asked, her voice tinged with skepticism. "Because it's overdue," I said simply. "This company should have fought for you, not against you. And if you're willing to give us another chance, I'd like to make things right." Jennifer returned the following week as the new head of our AI division. Within days, she had rallied her team, revitalizing a department that had grown stagnant under Mark's leadership. Watching her thrive was one of the most satisfying moments of my career. But it wasn't just about bringing back those we had lost. It was about creating a culture where people felt safe, valued, and empowered. I worked closely with HR to overhaul our policies, introducing anonymous feedback channels, transparent reporting structures, and mandatory leadership training. We sent a clear message: Everest Technologies would no longer tolerate discrimination, harassment, or any form of toxic behavior. The impact was immediate. Employees began speaking up, sharing ideas, and taking risks they had once avoided. Productivity soared, and for the first time in years, our innovation pipeline overflowed with fresh concepts. Our clients noticed the difference. 2. The Thompson account, which had been on the verge of leaving us under Mark's tenure, renewed their contract and even doubled their investment. During a meeting with their executives, they praised our new approach. "This is the Everest we always hoped to work with," Mr. Thompson said. "It feels like you're finally living up to your potential." Hearing those words, I couldn't help but think of my father. His small business had failed not because of a lack of vision but because of leaders who valued profit over people. He had always told me, "Success isn't just about what you build, it's about who you build it with." I had carried that lesson with me, and now, it was shaping the future of Everest Technologies. Despite the progress, there were moments of doubt and difficulty. Not everyone welcomed the changes. Some middle managers, loyal to Mark's methods, resigned rather than adapt. Others resisted quietly, testing the limits of the new culture. But for every challenge, there were victories: employees stepping into leadership roles they had been denied, teams achieving milestones they once thought impossible. One evening, as I reviewed the week's reports, Sarah walked into my office. "Employee satisfaction is at an all-time high," she said, setting her tablet on my desk. "And productivity is up 40% across the board." "That's good to hear," I replied. though my mind was already on the next steps. Sarah hesitated for a moment before speaking again. Do you think they'll ever really understand? Understand what? I asked, looking up at her. How much you've sacrificed to make this happen. How much it cost you personally. I leaned back in my chair, considering her words. Maybe they don't need to, I said finally. What matters is that they have the chance to thrive now. That's enough for me. And it was. Seeing Everest Technologies transform into a place where people felt empowered, where ideas flourished, and where integrity mattered, it was more fulfilling than I could have imagined. The storm Mark and his friends had created was over. And in its wake, we were building something new, something better. Everest Technologies wasn't just a company anymore, it was a testament to the power of resilience, accountability, and hope. And as I watched it rise, I knew my father would have been proud. 6 months had passed since I revealed my identity and reclaimed Everest Technologies. Those months had been a whirlwind of challenges and triumphs. But as I stood in my office overlooking the city skyline, I felt a deep sense of peace. For the first time in years, the company felt like mine again, a place built on integrity, vision, and a collective drive to succeed. Mark's name, once whispered with respect, had faded into irrelevance. After his termination, he attempted to salvage his reputation, posting self-serving updates on professional networks and spinning tales of strategic differences. But the truth always finds its way to the surface. The media had taken an intense interest in the story once it leaked. Articles dissected the toxic culture Mark and his inner circle had fostered, alongside exposés on workplace harassment and corporate accountability. Former employees came forward with stories that painted a damning picture of Mark's tenure. It wasn't long before he was blacklisted from every major company in the industry. I had learned through Sarah that he'd taken a job as a junior sales associate at a small electronics store in Ohio. His once polished confidence had eroded, leaving behind a man clinging to what remained of his dignity. The man who once mocked others for their small lives now struggled to meet basic sales quotas. His personal life fared no better. His mother, who had once gloated about her son's success, issued a tearful apology in a televised interview. I didn't know, she had said. I thought he was helping build something great, not tearing people down. Mark's wife, the one he used to belittle and mock at every turn, had become a symbol of resilience and accountability. While he had become a cautionary tale. But as much as Mark's downfall dominated the headlines, my focus was on what we were building at Everest Technologies. Every step we took forward felt like a victory. Not just for me but for everyone who had been held back under his leadership. Jennifer, now heading our AI division, was thriving. Her team had already filed multiple patents, and one of their projects had resolved a key issue for the Thomson account, earning their highest praise. During a meeting, Jennifer confided in me. I never thought I'd have this kind of opportunity again. Thank you for believing in me. Her words reminded me of why I had fought so hard to reclaim Everest. It wasn't about revenge, it was about creating a space where people could reach their full potential, where their voices mattered, and where their contributions were valued. The ripple effects of our transformation were visible everywhere. Departments that had once operated in silos were now collaborating seamlessly. Employees who had been dismissed as unremarkable under Mark's tenure were stepping into leadership roles and excelling. For the first time in the company's history, our HR team reported 0 harassment complaints in a quarter. Sarah, as always, kept a close eye on every development. One day, she walked into my office with a tablet in hand and a knowing smile. The class action settlement has been finalized, she said. 300 former employees will receive compensation for the harm they endured under the old leadership. I nodded, feeling a deep sense of closure. It's about more than the money, I said. It's about acknowledging their pain. They deserved better. And now they know they were heard. Sarah hesitated before speaking again. James from Thompson's team sent a gift, she said, placing a bottle of champagne on my desk. They're doubling their contract again. Thanks to Jennifer's latest proposal. I smiled, feeling a swell of pride for the team we were building. It's not just Jennifer, I said. It's everyone. We're finally working as one company, one vision. Despite the progress, the occasional remnants of the past lingered. Mark tried to contact me once through LinkedIn, his profile still listing him as Everest's former VP of Operations. It was a hollow gesture, one I ignored, knowing that the person he once pretended to be no longer had any relevance in my life. The requests for interviews kept coming, journalists eager to document how a meek wife had toppled an empire of arrogance. But I declined them all, redirecting the spotlight to my team instead. They were the real heroes of this story, the ones who had persevered, adapted, and thrived despite the odds. One evening, Sarah brought me the final performance report for the quarter. Profits were up 60%. Employee satisfaction had reached an all-time high, and our stock had rebounded to record levels. "You've done it," she said softly. I looked out the window, watching the city lights twinkle in the distance. "We've done it," I corrected. As I stood there, I thought of my father and the lessons he had taught me. Success, he always said, wasn't just about what you achieve, it's about who you bring with you and the legacy you leave behind. Mark and his circle were gone, but they had left behind a lesson I would carry forever. Power without accountability is a house of cards, destined to collapse. But when power is wielded with integrity, it builds foundations that can weather any storm. The next day, I walked into a board meeting with renewed purpose. Everest Technologies was no longer just a company, it was a community, a vision, and a promise. And as we discussed plans for international expansion, I felt a quiet confidence in the room. The storm had passed, but the real work was just beginning. And for the first time in years, I was ready. And so, the story of Everest Technologies turned a new chapter, one of redemption, transformation, and growth. What began as a tale of betrayal and mockery ended as a testament to resilience and the power of integrity. Emily Clark, once underestimated, proved that true strength lies not in seeking revenge but in creating a future where others can thrive. The company blossomed under her leadership. Employees found their voices, and the toxic culture was replaced by one of collaboration and innovation. Mark and his circle became a distant memory, their downfall a reminder that arrogance and cruelty never triumph over accountability. Emily's journey teaches us that life is about choices, about standing tall, even when it's easier to shrink away. If you've enjoyed this story of empowerment, don't forget to subscribe to Life Stories for more inspiring tales. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next video.